For Grandma Margaret, I have just gotten home from the longest of long 12 hours that somehow turned into 16 hours because of staffing issues, nursing shifts. I am exhausted mentally and physically, and I feel filthy with sweat, tears, and many other things I should not be covered in. All I want to do right now is chop something into oblivion until I feel somewhat normal again. I want to not have to think for just a little while. When I unlock my apartment door, I am surprised to find Grandma Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, smiling, as always. After a shower and a change of clothes, I realizes that exactly what I need to do is make Noefla soup for myself and Grandma. What is Noefla soup, you may ask? It is a German dumpling soup that you'll be hard-pressed to find in any diner outside of the Midwest. Those who eat it are picky about how it is made, and no two people make it exactly the same. Not only that, but it is a recipe that is impossible to make exactly the same every time that you make it. Grandma Mary taught me how to make it as a small girl, long before junior high and shortly after I learned to read. It has always been our favorite meal to share. Starting with the vegetables, I carefully peels the potatoes, making sure that I cut off the skin and only a small amount of potato. No conversation passes between the two of us. Grandma always knows when I needed a mental break at the end of the day and how most times I can't talk about what went so horribly wrong due to patient privacy. She never pushes me to talk about it. Instead, she sits at the table and watches as I goes through the motions of preparing our dish. A pound or so of potatoes later, I'm never too careful about the amounts that go into making Noefla soup or the recipe. Noefla soup is not a dish of measurement, it is a dish of feelings. The amounts that go into it depend on what you're hungry for at the moment, what looks right, or what feels right. No recipe has ever been put on paper, just passed on from one generation to the next with wise words of, "Whenever it looks like enough, dear." Grandma always said that it was not a recipe meant to be shrunk or modified. It always makes a large amount, and any attempt at shrinking has been unsuccessful, although making it larger comes out perfectly every time. This works well when you are from the Midwest and are a firm believer in freezing the extra for a day when you don't want to make it from scratch. I chop the celery, carrots, and onions quickly as Margaret looks on from the table, nodding her approval occasionally. Once all of the vegetables are cooking in a lot of butter, yes, it's bad for you, but most comfort foods are, it's time to make the Noefla dough. My favorite part of making this meal, and also the most comforting. Eggs, flour, and a tiny bit of chicken broth get mixed together until everything is mixed together. The secret is to use only a certain amount of flour and add more chicken broth until it is right. Doing the reverse, adding set amounts of all three ingredients and adding more flour tends to make the dough taste just like you would think it would. Flour. Some people prefer chicken noodle soup, others like macaroni and cheese after long days. For me, it is Noefla soup. Creating the dough is one of the most relaxing things I could think to do after a long day, and Grandma watches carefully as I knead the dough and rolls it into snakes. Only every once in a while does she gestures to add just a little more chicken broth. Dropping bits of dough into boiling chicken broth puts me into a trance. As I place the lid on the pot to boil for several minutes, my mind slips into the past. The bad melts away quickly, and memories of standing on a stool wearing Grandma's second-best apron make their way to the front of my mind. I remember the hem of the apron dragging on the floor at first, being so little I could barely see over the counter. Then I remember the awkward middle school years and unloading my boy and friend troubles over a bowl of Noefla dough. Lastly, I remember becoming an adult and trying hard to make time in my busy life for Grandma's house at least once a week. Though, once work, friends, significant others, and my own children came into the picture, it seems that almost 2 would go by before I found myself back in her kitchen again. As I put the finishing touches on the soup and turn off the burner, the memories fade and I am back in my own apartment once again. Grandma says nothing, but she has always made my day better, just by being there. I dish a single bowl of soup, butter a piece of bread, because nothing goes with Noefla soup the way a buttered piece of bread does, and sit down at the table. Grandma Mary has been gone for 11 years now, and on the hardest days, after the worst shifts, I always miss her the most. The regrets become an inner monologue, before being spoken out loud. Did I spend enough time with her?
All the King's Men. This story contains themes or mentions of suicide or self-harm. Mary Ellen caught her breath sharply while making her way down the stairwell from the 10th story of the shabby apartment building. Her left shoulder rubbed against the hard plaster wall, as her left hand grasped the wooden banister. With each descending step, her short halting breaths became deeper and more relaxed. By the time she reached street level, her breath was normal and the butterflies that caused waves of discomfort in her solar plexus had flown off to wherever stomach butterflies disperse themselves. She felt conscious self-control return. Like silent fireworks, red, white and blue light beams of emergency vehicles broke against the night's dark cloak. Their jumping and darting from side to side and up and down added to the nervous tension of the scene that met her as she walked outside. Good job, M.E. John Smythe, the fire chief, walked over to her with an outstretched hand. His voice was flat, practical. I'm not one for defunding the police, but this situation called for some real people skills. One wrong word and that young lady would have been gone. Yes, Mary Ellen replied, precarious, touch and go. She felt a sudden chill. Can I get a blanket, or a jacket? Sure thing. John waved in the direction of one of the ambulances, gesturing with his arms for one of the medics to bring a blanket. A younger man in a medical smock appeared from the ambulance, walked toward them and placed a heavy wool blanket around Mary Ellen's shoulders. We're lucky to have you, he said. The girl you talked off that roof has no idea how lucky she is. We'll see, John. This is just the first step in a long, tough journey. Mary Ellen's attention followed her thoughts, as she considered how much therapy and emotional support the young woman would need before she would walk free of the trauma that had pushed her up to the roof of a 10-story building, believing her only way out was to end her life. Her voice faded a little. If she's willing to make it. Well, I'm looking at the one person in this town who can motivate her. John said heartily. The good thing is she'll be in the psychiatric ward for a month. She won't be able to run away from me, once I am given clearance. A captive audience, John laughed. Then he said, why would anyone run away from you, Em? You know damned well why. She retorted. Meet me and you meet yourself. And your presence stimulates profound change. John shook his head. He was always astonished at the success this not quite 40-year-old, well-kept, but hardly beautiful woman with earlobe-length chestnut hair and large round glasses overwhelming her angular face had achieved in many situations that would have turned into tragedy under another. You have a gift, M.E. Your ability to pull these girls out of bad circumstances and lift them to their feet is a real gift. He sighed, for which we are truly grateful. I can't pull them out. I can only offer them a lifeline, John. Grabbing it is up to them. Keep in mind, John, the relationship is voluntary for both people. There's no guarantee someone will want to work with an advocate like me. If a girl will meet with me just once, we have a chance. She glanced in the direction of the building she had just left. In this girl's case, we've already met, so I am very hopeful she'll want to interact with me again. Mary Ellen hesitated a second. If shame doesn't create a barrier. She didn't jump. You said something that changed her mind. For an instant, John, Mary Ellen said. Enough to get her to step back. Not enough to convince her she's worth fighting for. That might take a really hard sell. And the come to Jesus moment is when you convince her she has value. The come to Jesus moment is only if she grasps the idea of her own value. I merely reflect possibilities. A builder with a crate loaded with tools. Here I stand. Mary Ellen stood erect at attention for a few seconds, remade, rebuilt. Put back together after being destroyed. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and thrust her purse comically over her shoulder, many times, but you really are looking at a fully functioning Humpty Dumpty with cracks mended. Visible, but together again. Then she turned and headed toward her car thinking this hard-boiled egg is very, very grateful for all the tools left behind by all the king's men. Mary Ellen considered the help she had received in her own life. Wow, what she would give to stand in the presence of the kaleidoscope of life-changing rescuers and mentors to who had stepped in and out of her life, bearing gifts and filling her toolbox. What do you say, she asked herself, to the teacher who called the child abuse hotline 30 years ago? When she suspected things weren't quite right at home. Thanks for giving me myself? Do you have even the most minuscule idea, she addressed Th.